Ladies and gentlemen, our next focus is the Mahabharat over the Minority Report that has taken the political ecosystem and social media by storm. Now, by now, you might have already heard or read the big headline figures. A 7.8% decrease in majority Hindu population and a 43.15% increase in the minority Muslim population over a period of 65 years. This is what the report is saying. Headline figures that have, of course, spurred a demography is destiny discourse in poll season. But we at Mirror now want to focus on the fine print, which is why the details actually reveal a slightly different feature. The 7.8% decrease in the Hindu population is from a baseline of 84.68% in 1950 to 78.06% in 2015, essentially to say that in 1950, out of the population of this country, about 85% were Hindus, majority. In 2015, that figure has come down to 78.06%. So that's a 7.8% decrease in the Hindu population. The corresponding figure for Muslims is 9.84 in 1950 to 14.09% in 2015. Hence, the 43% increase on the base figure of 9.84%. I don't want to confuse you here, simply saying that in India in 1950, the population of Muslims was 9.84%. In 2015, it increased to 14.09%, and that is an increase of 43%. There's a simpler way of understanding this. A difference of 50 on a base figure of 100 is a net 50% gain. But a difference of 50 on a base figure of 1 lakh is just 0.05%. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's not as if Muslims in India suddenly stand to eclipse the Hindu population. Now, the dip in the majority population in India is in keeping with liberal democracies across the world. But it is a sharp departure from our neighboring countries. In Pakistan, in Bangladesh, and in Afghanistan that have a Muslim majority, their population, which means the majority population, which means the Muslim population, has actually grown. It's grown by 3.7% in Pakistan and by 18% in Bangladesh. However, there's an exception to this trend: Maldives. The authors of the report say, and I quote, "Contrary to noise in several quarters, careful analysis of the data shows that minorities are not just protected, but indeed thriving in India." Here's another question. In India, are Muslims those who produce zyada bacche, as the Prime Minister said? Well, the fertility rates of different communities in India give us nuance that most politicians, for obvious reasons, are happy to ignore. A Pew Center study in 2021 has shown that far from the popular notion of hum do hamare char for Muslims, the fertility rates of Hindus and Muslims are actually converging, with the total fertility rate of Muslims in 2015 standing at 2.6% compared to 2.1% of Hindus. In other words, statistically, Muslim couples are producing nearly the same number of children as Hindu couples. Sadly, politics, especially in poll season, has little time for patience or nuance. Here's a sample of some of the key political reactions that have come into this big story.
दीदी, प्रधानमंत्री की आर्थिक सलाहकार परिषद की एक स्टडी में पाया गया है 1950 से 2015 के बीच हिंदुओं की आबादी 7.8% घट गई है, जबकि भारत की जनसंख्या में अल्पसंख्यक समूहों की हिस्सेदारी बढ़ गई है।
ये सवाल कहाँ से आया आपके पास? ऑफिस की तरफ से ना? ऑफिस को बोलो प्रियंका जी पूछिए किसने भेजा उन्हें।
इसके लिए अगर कोई जिम्मेदार है तो ये कांग्रेस पार्टी, बिहार में आरजेडी पार्टी, कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी, ये जिम्मेदार हैं, क्योंकि इन्होंने वोट बैंक की राजनीति की और ये भारत के लोकतंत्र के लिए खतरा है। बगल में पाकिस्तान देखें, पाकिस्तान में हम 22% थे, घट करके 1 से नीचा हो गए।
आप देखिएगा जो सेंसस होना था 21-22 में, आज 24 हो गया, अभी तक तो हुआ नहीं। ये केवल देश की जनता को भ्रम में डालना और लोगों में नफरत फैलाने की बात ये लोग कर रहे हैं। ये पूरी तरीके से प्रधानमंत्री जी, भाजपा के लोगों का यही एजेंडा है। 10 साल तक इन्होंने लोगों को ठगा है और फिर ठगना चाहते हैं।
Okay, you heard Priyanka Gandhi ask, who's behind this report? The person who is behind this report is Professor Shamika Ravi. She's joining us on the broadcast. Just to also let you know that she's the daughter of the governor of Tamil Nadu, R.N. Ravi. Professor Ravi, thank you very much for your time here on Mirana. Can I start by asking you when this report was commissioned and what the mandate of this report was? What's the purpose of this report?
This is not a commission study, Shreya. There have been very few commission studies that we do. Basically, this is it's a research paper. This is a paper that some of us as researchers, we felt when we saw this data, that let us look at what is happening to minorities. And, my co-authors, Apoorv Mishra and Abraham Jose, both younger colleagues and extremely capable people, particularly capable with data and asking the right policy questions, we started to look at the data. So this is not commissioned by any authority. And when we started to find, changes, we started to again look at further refinements. We looked at countries where there have not been changes, right? Countries like Turkey, Thailand, etc., where you have had minimal changes in 65 years. So each of them becomes a line of research in itself.
Professor Ravi, you have looked at 167 countries in your research. As regards India, your research is saying that in the last 65 years, the majority population, that is Hindus, has seen a dip by about 7%, and the Muslim population has increased, the minority population, not just Muslims, you're also talking about Sikhs, you're also talking about, other minorities, like Buddhists. Can I ask you then, if this trend is in keeping with liberal democracies across the world, and how you look at it when you set it in our neighborhood?
I think those are the two contexts, Shreya, that the findings for India become particularly striking. One is that the nature of change, which is that share of minority is increasing, and that too significantly, 7.82% is not a small number, particularly within 65 years. We are very similar to the Western plural liberal democracies. And we are very unlike our neighborhood, where other than Myanmar, which saw a 10% decline in the Theravada Buddhist population, we have seen the biggest decline in majority population and a commensurate, therefore, increase in the minority population. All other countries in the neighborhood, Pakistan, Bangladesh, which has seen the biggest decline, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Afghanistan, all these countries have seen alarming decline in the share, not absolute number, share of minority religions. So in that sense, India is truly unique.
You have said that, and I'm quoting you here, that in several quarters there is noise, and contrary to this noise, careful analysis of the data is actually showing that minorities are not just protected, but are also thriving in India. Professor Ravi, as someone who looks at numbers, can I ask you if population increase is the only matrix with which we can measure the thriving and the prosperity of a minority community?
Oh, absolutely, Shreya. This is like a final outcome. It's like, when we look at sex ratio and we say that if you have a declining sex ratio, it's an outcome of a discriminatory society. Right. Similarly, here, if we see that the share, not absolute, but the share of minority population, if it is rising over time, what does it tell you? It tells you that there are many policies, but the community as a whole is plural, and that minority community, which means they are outnumbered, they're smaller, but they're growing as a share. So I think it's an excellent, yes, it is one metric, but it's a composite metric. It's like a final outcome of many policies that go towards making minorities secure and hence grow in strength.
Professor Ravi, we've just heard from a politician called Tejasvi Yadav. I'm fairly certain you're aware who he is. He's given a soundbite and he's asking a question. He's saying, where are these numbers coming from? Because the last census that was held in this country was in 2011, and there was a census due in 2022, 2021. That hasn't happened. How can we believe these numbers?
So I think Tejasvi Yadav, just like all other politicians who might be asking, actually I have also seen some editors who should know better. Please read the paper. I know reading research is not a common trait, but I think educating yourself might actually serve the the population better when we have better informed leaders. The paper very clearly says that there is a data set called Religious Characteristics of State Data Set. It's called the RCS-DEM, and this was published about 6-7 years back by a group of academics in the US. And this has been scientifically put together for many decades for almost all countries of the world. So census has not happened, but and this is, I think, we have had census in the past. We've had 2001, we've had 2011, and the 15 data that you have is basically a projection from the past. This is a very standard practice that the Registrar General does. Every time we have a census, you make projections for the next decade and a half. So that's where the data is from. There's nothing hidden. This is not new government data. And in that sense, this is truly independent and publicly available. And we strongly encourage independent, younger researchers to go out and replicate and to see what they find.
Can I ask you a question about the timing of this report? We are bang in the middle of an election season that started with a lot of talk about Vikas. It's now come down to Hindu-Muslim. That rhetoric is currently under play with Muslim quotas, etc., etc. When people question you about the timing of this report and why release it now, what's your response to them?
Yeah. So Shreya, I think this is partly the job of media to also educate people at large. The report, of course, has taken 8 months. This is, I mean, if you see the 67-page report, it's there are lots of refinements, there's a lot of analysis, etc. It takes time. And when it was finally ready, it was out there. But, what I'm reminded of is in the midst of the pandemic, when I would put out statistics on COVID, I would get calls from people saying, Shamika, why are you putting out these statistics? Because people become complacent when they see things are improving. Similarly, I would also get calls from people saying, don't put out these numbers because people are getting fearful. And my assertion as a researcher is to say that, we need a scientific temperament. How can not knowing, Shreya, be better than doing this anecdotal fear-mongering, which is what, in the lack of absence of data, that is what politics descends into. So I think a report like this really should make for more scientific engagement, right? Beyond the anecdotal shrill, the noise that you see. So yeah, I think this is a first attempt to objectively measuring what the trends are on the ground. Again, another thing I think our leaders also have to appreciate, that we are one of the few countries that not only defines minority, we have a dedicated ministry for minority affairs. How are you going to assess the implications, the effectiveness of policies, if we are going to turn a blind eye or pretend to be ostriches and not study real changes on the ground? So I think not knowing is not an option. I think, the policy making has to be scientific. We have to measure things. And, we have to look at effectiveness of different policies of the past, but also, shape our future policies in more scientific and modern ways.
You speak about fear-mongering, but the headline right now across all television channels is 43%, 7% versus 43%. The fear-mongering in this election season, even before that, is Muslim हर जगह 4 बच्चे पैदा कर रहे हैं. एक दिन their population will be more than Hindus. I know your report doesn't say that anyway, but does that feed into that fear-mongering? And would speaking about the convergence in the Hindu and Muslim fertility rate have maybe toned down some of the hysteria around the report we are seeing?
Not at all, Shreya, because again, you are being simplistic in the sense that it's not just fertility that drives shares changing over time. There are many factors, and that's why looking at shares, changing shares of religions or religious demographic is like a final outcome. Like it's a metric that is capturing many things. Fertility differences is one of them. You are going to see migration as a driving factor, like in the European case. The biggest changes that are happening in OECD countries is on account of migration. And the changes that you're seeing in countries of Africa is on account of conversion. So let's not be simplistic. And I definitely think as journalists and editors, you guys have to take this report, read it, and sort of diffuse the shrillness, because people have to read reports. People have to not simplify and simplistically just, hang on to what suits their narrative. So it's a scientific paper. It's an attempt to measure. And I think it's, perhaps one of the first papers that objectively measures changes on the ground in India.
Professor Ravi, appreciate you taking all our questions. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, I'm slipping into a quick break on the show. There's more on the other side, the entire Muslim quota debate. Do stay with us.